Okay, we're going to try this again. Bear with me. We're having issues technically. I don't know if it's the internet acting up or just I don't know how to use technology. I'm not exactly sure, but we are figuring things out. I do appreciate everybody's patience with it. So let's try this again. Camera doesn't want to work. My playback doesn't want to work. Let's try it one more time. Alright, I think we're good now. Oh, and happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Well, hello there. Come on in and get cozy by the fireplace. Let me get settled into my old rocking chair and I'll tell you a couple stories. Haunting stories. Stories that are not for the faint of heart. Some of these stories may not be about hauntings per se, but nonetheless will haunt you. Because after all, some of the most scary things in life are not ghosts and demons, but the people we cross on the street. If you're brave enough, keep listening. If not, get up and leave now, because you'll never be the same. Don't say I didn't warn you. Welcome to the Haunting Stories from the Old Rocking Chair. Christmas 88. Written by user audaciousBoo. I was 9. It was Christmas Eve, 1988. And my family's Christmas Eve party was winding down. My grandma was digging through the remnants of boxes, bows, and wrapping paper from our family's white elephant gift exchange to see what she could salvage for next year, and my mother and aunt were laughing and trading stories of holidays past. My 2 older sisters, Sherry and Penny, who were adults at the time, being 18 and 20 years older than me, were picking over the leftovers at the dining room table. I was sitting near the back of the Christmas tree, where 3 gifts with my name on them remained. These were for my mom, my grandma, and as it was tradition, I could only open 1 gift before bedtime on Christmas Eve. The rest had to wait, and I had to open with my Santa gifts on Christmas morning. I accessed the 3 packages for some time before making my selection. It was nearing midnight. I had to be in bed soon, so I decided to just pick the biggest because it had weight and didn't sound like clothes when I shook it. When my mom said it was time, I eagerly unwrapped the gift. At my grandma's unspoken request, I was careful not to rip the paper and mess up the bow, and set it aside as my gift was revealed. It was a telescope. It wasn't a high-quality, count the rings of Saturn type though. It was small, mostly made of plastic, and still had a $14.99 price sticker on it. I was gracious even though I was not impressed, though not because of the quality. I didn't know the difference between a nice telescope and a cheap toy one because I simply had no interest in the function. And even if I was interested in what it did, the simple assembly required to make it work exceeded the grasp of my exceptionally short attention span. Now, my sister Sherry is the oldest, and to me back then she was like a bossy hall monitor. She had no real authority, but that didn't stop her from trying to run everything. I'm 41 now, and she is 61, and seriously, not much has changed in that aspect. My other sister Penny is just 2 years younger than Sherry, so she would have been 29 at the time. She was different. A combination of unattended schizophrenia and drug abuse made her the wild card, meaning you never knew what you were going to get with her. One night, she had managed to maintain a level of normalcy and a jovial mood, though under any other circumstances at the time, and regardless of her behavior, her personality seemed more comparable to mine rather than any of the other adults in the room. Penny took an enthusiastic interest in my new gift and asked if we could go out back and test it out. I agreed, knowing that my compliance would afford me a bit more time before I had to go to bed, and being a child, on the night before Christmas, I was naturally restless. Penny and I ascended onto the back porch, and in no time my sister had the telescope assembled and in position for celestial exploration. It took her a bit longer to find a point of focus and adjust all the little knobs for optimal viewing, so while she was occupied with that, my attention was drawn to the icicles that was forming on the awning and the dog's water ball that had turned into solid ice. Being a Texan, this isn't generally common, even for December, though it isn't generally uncommon. Our winters are short, but like my eccentric sister, you never know what you're going to get when it arrives. I feel I needed to preface this next part of the story with two very important points. First, I need to say that my memory of this incident, however perplexing, it is clear and it is vivid to me now as the very night it occurred. So this is a true and accurate account. Secondly, this entire event lasted no more than a minute, and while I must describe these events in succession, many of them occurred all at once. I just taken off my mittens so I could utilize the full function of my hands and fingers for grasping when I heard Penny exclaim in amusement, "Whoa, cool!" Still having no interest at all in the stargazing and far more focused on trying to retrieve the perfect icicle from the awning using a garden hoe, I didn't even look up from what I was doing. I figured she would manage to find something bright to look at, and that just meant I had a bit more time to spend on trying to dislodge the big beautiful icicle before it melted. Then it occurred to me that the icicle was definitely melting and quite rapidly. Then just moments before it was still in the process of forming. Now it was dripping like a leaky faucet, and what was even stranger was that all this water was dripping around me, yet it made no sound. In fact, nothing made a sound. Not the water, or the wind, or the highway in the distance. Not even my sister tinkering with the telescope. Then the dripping slowed. And I don't mean that in the sense that there were more time between each drop, but rather the droplets were taking longer to fall to the ground. Confused, I immediately looked over at my sister and found her standing upright, not bent over, peering into the telescope but staring out into the yard. I turned to match her gaze, and what I saw completely eluded my grasp of my 9-year-old comprehension. Hovering a mere 4 feet above my backyard fence was an almond-shaped capsule about the size of a pontoon boat. It was a metallic color like chrome with no discernible crevices, no windows, no doors. It was completely flush and even. It had no fixtures for light to shine from. The area around it was completely illuminated as light reflected off of millions of water droplets now suspended in midair. I was struck with fear and confusion as I broke my gaze just long enough to look over at my sister, searching for some sort of sign as to what this thing was, and if we were in any danger. Penny looked over at me, grinning from ear to ear. "Cindy Boo, it's a UFO!" I didn't hear her say it, and her lips didn't move, but that's what she said. We both looked back at the object, and it tilted slightly downward. At this angle, it appeared to be spinning as a flash of iridescent light made one complete rotation around its interior. Then, in a split second, it shot straight up and disappeared into the night sky. Darkness resumed along with all the sounds of the night and the crisp chill of the air. I stood dumbfounded, amazed and terrified by what I just experienced, while at the same time I felt relieved that it was over and excited. I didn't know whether to run away or cry or laugh. I looked over at my sister, wanting to run to her, but I was still frozen in the place I stood, as if all of my cognitive resources were occupied, trying to process everything, and I was momentarily unable to communicate movement to my legs. Penny was clearly not frightened, but we just witnessed. She seemed just as blissful as I'd ever seen her, and while at times I found that refreshing, in this instance it confused me. I needed to observe a regular adult response. Reclaiming the use of my legs, I ran towards the door, saying, "Let's go tell Mom." "Yeah," Penny agreed, and followed me through the back door. I was glad she was there and had my back. I knew there was no way my mom would believe me about a spaceship if it had only come from me. Running in with my Kmart telescope, we entered the dining room where Mom stood laughing as my grandma sang the phrase, "We won't go until we get some." I exclaimed, "Mom, Mom, me and Penny just saw a—" I briefly forgot what my sister had called it, but she chimed in to assist. "A UFO," Penny interjected. "You did? With your new telescope?" Mom inquired. "No, it was in the backyard by my fort, right above the fence, and—" I wanted to tell her everything all at once, but I just wasn't fast or articulate enough to express what all had transpired, and my mom was a regular adult who saw me as an imaginative child, and my sister as well as somewhat mild version of a crazy person she expected to show by the end of the night. "Maybe it was Santa. I hope he doesn't pass you up because you're not in bed." I didn't believe in Santa Claus. I never did. I just pretended as long as I could for the extra presents. I did understand the situation I was in, though. I knew Mom was done for the night and wanted me to go to bed so she could set up the Santa gifts and finally get some rest herself. Not to mention, she was unusually well within the bounds of good insight by steering away from conversations featuring supernatural events with my sister. It just so happened that on this occasion it was all true, and I understood that she would never know that. Shortly after the movie came out called Fire in the Sky, starring D.B. Sweeney, a based on true events film about a small-town man who allegedly was abducted by aliens, experimented on, and returned several days later. The movie, coupled with my memory of the event, terrified me beyond expression, causing me to have night terrors throughout my childhood about the visitors returning to claim me, and I'm certain it initiated my lifelong battle with sleep paralysis dreams. I was so terrified. I wouldn't watch or read anything that had to do with extraterrestrials, and I wouldn't speak of it again for nearly 30 years. Somewhere in that span of time, I convinced myself that the entire event had been a horrible, terrible nightmare that I just remembered every single detail of, down to the mittens I was wearing, where it landed on the ground, when I took them off and rushed to the heat I felt hot on my cheeks from the fireplace when I ran back into the house that night. My sister was estranged for many years throughout my childhood, as her condition got much worse before it got better again. She finally got clean and got on the right meds, and a few years ago she came to live with us. The first week she was here, we spent a lot of time talking about different things that had happened over the years. Things she said and done. I discovered that she barely had any recollection of a great deal of it, claiming that must have been the other me. I guess I got caught up in the spirit of showering, and I got brave or something, and so I decided to ask her about the night during one of our talks. "Do you remember that one Christmas Eve?" is all I got out of my mouth before she responded with, "You mean the night we saw the UFO in the backyard?" That's a memory that stuck. I remember it as clear as yesterday. She then proceeded to describe the experience from her perspective, with very little variation from my own experience. So there it is. It was not a dream. It was not my 9-year-old imagination. All those little details that made no sense, the ones I used to tell myself it didn't happen, are the same details that later on affirmed the reality of it. I saw a UFO in my backyard on Christmas Eve, 1988, and I was 9 years old. Strange Happenings at a Suburban Pond in the Deep South, written by Anonymous. A collection of weird, unexplainable stories from my local pond, some paranormal, some oddities, and some generally weird occurrences. Apologies for the poor writing in advance. A little background about the pond. I live around this pond for over 18 years, and saw it go from being a small farm pond surrounded by a field and deep forest into a pond sandwiched between 3 huge neighborhoods and a pool. It was only shielded by a thin layer of wood surrounding it. As far as I know, the pond was built in the early 1900s, and it had 2 barbed wire fence lines running through the pond, creating a cross. Why run barbed wire through a pond? There were 2 very old houses to the right of the pond, and a neighborhood 100 yards through the woods to the left. Growing up, the pond was sort of our local legend, and every kid refused to go and explore it. Fast forward 10 years, and I was an avid fisherman who would spend every day after school trying out new waterways in my area to try and find the hottest fishing spots. None were as convenient or plentiful as this pond, which I ended up at just about every other day. My first strange occurrence here was one summer night I stayed out past dark to try to get a few more bites, when all of a sudden light flooded from behind me as if a big truck had parked with its headlights on. I immediately turned, thinking possibly a car just parked in its driveway at the houses about 100 yards behind me through the woods. Nothing was there, and from the angle there was no way headlights could have traveled like that. I decided that it was enough for tonight and left our trail leading to the nearby pool parking lot. The second one was a month or so later, but a very eventful evening. As I was walking down the trail from the pool to the pond with my fishing bag on my back, I felt clear as day my backpack getting pushed from the side as if someone was trying to spin me towards them. This happened in the exact spot as to where I was standing when the light had hit me before. I stood there for a second and looked to see if maybe I had walked into a fishing line or something. To my surprise, there in the water was a small clay statue of Ganesh and a coconut. Now, seeing Hindu and Indian culture was nothing new to me, as the area I lived in had the highest population density of Indian people in America, and many of my lifelong friends are Indian. But what shocked me was if it was something wanted to get my attention and say, check this out. Honestly, this was pretty comforting as I went from being freaked out from being pushed to being amazed and intrigued by what I believe it was pointing towards me. Honestly, this was very comforting, as I went from being freaked out from being pushed to being amazed and intrigued by what I believe it was pointing me towards. Story 3. This is more of an explanation about the particular spot that every occurrence seemed to be happening at. The spot was just a little clearance in the bush where you could fish from, and it was about 6 feet by 6 feet area where grass didn't seem to grow, and it had an exotic-looking tree that was very clearly not native, hanging above it about 10 feet off the ground. In this spot, there was almost always a small animal hanging about, which would never take its eyes off of you until you got within 3 feet of it. Usually a bunny, but often a squirrel or a bird. If there wasn't an animal there might be some kind of object. One time a knife, strange pieces of old wood, colored rocks, and one time a $500 watch. It was if somebody was just coming and purposely leaving strange things in the spot, or as if the things were spawning here like a video game. Oddly enough, I was never freaked out by this spot, and actually would go there with friends and hang out on nice days. It had sort of a nice aura around it, and looked so interesting that it was hard not to appreciate. This is the last experience I've had at the pond, and by far the creepiest or craziest. One day, me, a buddy of mine, and a couple girls headed up to the pond to hang out after school. While hanging out, conveniently at the same spot, we see a small child, 3 to 5 years, come running from the old house on the other side of the pond to us. Concerned, we asked the kid what he was doing, where his parents were, and all that. The kid seems very disinterested in what we were asking him. He's asking us questions like if we are kids or if we are grown-ups. You know, typical kid stuff. When all of a sudden he turns the other way and starts talking to someone that is 100% not there. The person he's talking to is also seemingly trying to get him to go back to his parents, as the kid seems to be protesting against this, saying he wants to play with us instead. And this is the craziest part. The kid starts barking towards the water and pointing and saying, "Look, it's my dog. Do you see him?" As he's pointing straight towards the center of the pond, we ask where his dog is. He's in the water barking at me. That's where he drowned a year ago. All of us stood speechless for a second and then took him back to the other side of the pond where his dad met us and took him home. I know kids have wild imaginations and often imaginary friends, but this didn't seem make-believe. It generally seemed like he was talking to a fifth person who was not there and was responding to whatever they were saying. I always feel like this one specific spot at the pond was some kind of video game spawn point where when we walk by, a random event is triggered. I have half a dozen other crazy stories of things I've seen at this spot, but these are probably the best ones for a post like this. I'll tell the rest in the comments if there's any interest. My Haunted College Apartment. Written by user CheetahGirl666. I'll keep this short as I can. Every year of college, I lived in a new apartment. My favorite apartment was where I lived my junior year. I moved into a house with random roommates about 5 minutes from campus. I instantly fell in love with the house. It was old, with stained glass windows in the hallway, and floral wallpaper my grandmother would have just loved. I moved in May and was the only person in the house all summer. My housemates were staying in their hometowns, but I had a job in the area. My first creepy experience was there that summer. A quick layout of the upstairs where 3 of the 4 bedrooms were. You walked up the stairs, turned to the right, and walked up more stairs into the hallway. Directly in front of you is one room. Directly to the right is another. If you turned left down the hallway, my room was on the right, and the bathroom was directly at the end. One of my housemates had come to the house for a couple of days to grab some clothes. I was out of the house most of the time she was there. One night, I slept at my boyfriend's and came back in the morning. She said she left, so for the sake of staying cool, I would keep my bedroom door open, and I sleep naked since no one else was there. I woke up to my bedroom door shut. I was mortified, imagining my roommate running back into the house for something and seeing me naked in the bed while walking into the bathroom. I put on clothes to find her and apologize, but she was not home. That night, I came out of my room to wash my face before bed. I opened the door to a dark hallway, and my roommate's light on seeping under the door. I knocked on her door, but nobody answered. I continued my business to the bathroom, and when I heard the door creak behind me, I looked up in the mirror to see a head with blonde hair turning out of the bathroom and closing the door. I whipped open the door to an empty, dark hallway, and my roommate's light in her room turned off. Needless to say, I was freaked, and rushed over to my boyfriend's to stay there for the night. I didn't come back to my apartment for like a week. I finally got the nerve to come back and stay the night in my own bed. I always would sleep with the blinds drawn over my windows with one window slightly cracked for air. But when I jumped awake in the middle of the night, for seemingly no reason, my blinds were all drawn all the way to the top. In a sleepy haze, I figured I forgot to close them before I passed out. I drew them down again and went back to sleep. I woke up 3 more times that night. Each time, the blinds were all the way up. And again, I was a scaredy cat and slept at my boyfriend's the next night. The next night I slept there, I had a dream. I was looking into my room and all my furniture and belongings were floating an inch above the ground. In my dream, I ran to my housemate and asked for help. She walked into my room and her eyes turned white. She threw her head back and screamed, and all my furniture flew to the ceiling. I ran out of there, jumping in my car, and I drove down the street. But when I turned back at my windows from the street, I saw 2 dark shadows standing there looking at me. I remember driving in the dream across town to my boyfriend's, and as soon as I stepped out of the car, I was back in my room. This repeated a few times. I woke up in a sweat and felt like I was being watched. After the summer ended and my housemates moved back in, I didn't have any more encounters. I would hear footsteps when no one else was home, and sometimes my blinds would be in a different spot than I left them, but I no longer felt scared. But I would still get creeped out by my hallway. Anytime I had friends over, someone would tell me my house is haunted, and I agree. My housemates and I were hanging out one night when I told them all of my experiences. They said they felt stuff in the house too, but never saw anything like I did. When I was moving out, I brought this up to my landlord. He said I'm not the first person to say they felt ghostly experiences. Never threatening, but still scary. Which is how I felt. Never threatened, but definitely scared. He says it's mostly people in my room who talk about rogue footsteps, bumps in the night, and you guessed it, the blinds moving by themselves. He mentioned a couple lived in the house for over 60 years and lived in my room. Remember the 2 shadows in the window? He didn't say how they passed or why they moved out, and the look on his face seemed like he really knew, but didn't want to tell me. Maybe one of them died there. Maybe they both did. Regardless, the experience has greatly shaped the way I understand ghosts and energies. Before I left, I wrote a little note in my closet to respect the ghosts and that they're not looking to hurt you, at least as far as I can tell. There were a few other minor experiences, but those are the main ones. I would see things move around corners, curtains would flutter on their own with no draft, I would hear ghostly voices in the night, but like I said, I never felt threatened. I always felt reverent to the spirits in the house. Sometimes it felt like I was intruding. I think if the story the landlord told me of the couple was true, they really loved the house and just wanted to stick around longer. I loved the house like it was my own. Maybe that's why she showed herself to me that night in the bathroom. Anyways, thanks to anyone who made it through this. Stay happy and healthy, and remember to respect the ghost in your apartment. Never Be Alone. Written by user Leslie Perez 872. So this happened to me personally when I was in middle school, probably in 8th grade. In my middle school, we have these showers in the girls' locker room that were never used. One time I had to stay after class when PE was done because I was 30 minutes late to class, so I was the last one in the locker room to get changed. My locker is unfortunately all the way back in the back near where the showers are. That place always scared me because of the stories I heard about it a year before from some older kids. The story goes, there was once a time when the showers actually worked and students were able to use them. The reason why it stopped being used is because there was a murder there. A girl was by herself in the showers when the janitor, who worked at the school, snuck up on her and raped her. She struggled to get away, but she slips and hits her head on the shower handle and instantly died. I honestly don't remember what the kid said after that, but the first part always stuck. I always made sure I had at least one of my friends with me when I changed, because honestly, that could happen. But that day, I was by myself. I honestly wished I never came late to class that day. I was almost done changing when I heard a voice. Now keep in mind, this is a middle schooler all by themselves, no one around, not even the gym teacher, so I was a little scared. At first I thought it was in my head, but then I heard the voice again. I was able to tell what it said this time. Go away. Then I saw a shadow at the corner of my eye. I didn't even turn. I was so terrified, I quickly put on my shirt, then booked it out of there. I even left my backpack behind. That's how much I wanted to leave. I was lucky it was the last class of the day, too. Once I was home, I told my best friend, who was in the 6th grade at the time, about what happened. Her oldest sister was in the room and also heard what I said. They were shocked. More my friend's sister was. According to her, I wasn't the only one that experienced this. She had a friend that went through something similar. There are security cameras outside the girls' gym, and her friend knew the guy who worked on them. Apparently, there's a ghost that appears on the cameras once in a while. That scared me even more. After that day, I never went late to PE again, and made sure I wasn't alone when I changed. A Preacher Named Doc, written by user Knight_Crawler111. I live in a small town in Oklahoma that's located about an hour south of OKC. In my town, there's a Baptist church that pretty much everyone in town goes to if they're religious. Although I am religious, I've never really gone to that church much. But if I did, I'd go there. The first time I attended the church was on my 7th birthday. I went with my friends because I was celebrating the day with them, but his family wanted to attend church first. I actually really enjoyed the youth class. All my friends were there, so we goofed off more than we learned, so that made it appealing enough to want to go back a dozen or so more times. When I attended the church, The preacher was a very kind old man who always knew how to make you smile. He used to call me Red, because one time he challenged all the boys to eat a small jalapeno for $10. I ate it, and he said my face was so red he could mistake me for the Kool-Aid man. Whenever he would see me come to the church, he would say, "How's it hanging, Red?" And when I would leave, he would say, "Stay cool, Red." I came to become one of his favorite children in the youth group, and I grew to really admire him. So 7 years ago, I was saddened when I found out he had died. I was 13 at the time, and was at a basketball game when a friend who went to the youth group with me had said that he died the night before from old age, and the church was going to hold a dinner to honor his life that Sunday night, and asked if I wanted to go. I told him yes. We get to the church, and there are cars filling up the parking lot outside and lining the street. The place was so packed they had to move tables outside. We went inside to go find our other friends when one of the old ladies pulled my friend to the side. She asked my friend if he could go buy more ice and drinks and gave him some money. He said he would be happy to and left. I decided to stay to see if I could be of any service, as they were still setting up for the unexpected amount of people. After a few cups of tea and a lot of Dr. Pepper, hours earlier, I had to use the restroom. I made my way to the restroom only to find it occupied. I asked one of the church leaders if I could use the one in the nursery, and they said it was in use too, and to go ahead and use the bathroom in the preacher's office. I hustled my way there, and I made it there right when it felt like my bladder was about to explode. I get done and start washing my hands. I hear the door to the office open and close. I dry off my hands and open the door to see no one in the room. I immediately thought that someone was just checking to see if anyone was in the office. I made my way to the door, and when I was walking out of the office, I heard clear as day, "Stay cool, Red." My House, written by user thefatpsychic, also known as Mark Fults. In May 2014, I needed to move from my home in St. Elmo, Chattanooga, Tennessee. The individual I had taken care of for 15 years had finally rounded the corner and was certified nuts, in a very dangerous sense. So I found a beautiful little home in Lafayette, Georgia. And of course, being me, a little weird psychic, I always searched for haunted houses. And graciously, the universe brought one to me. It was the first house I looked at, and it was perfect in price and charming to look at. I could immediately tell that it was inhabited by unseen spirits. A good thing about renting a haunted house is the rent is cheaper. The neighbors won't bother you because they're scared, and it has atmosphere. So the first night after we moved in, I was trying to go to sleep, and the bedroom door looks out into the living room. My cousin Ellen had given us a beautiful couch as a housewarming gift. And that night, as I stared into the living room, I saw two elderly African-American ladies from another era. They were dressed in colorful cotton clothing and had very attractive turbans on top of their heads, made out of very colorful cloth as well. And they seemed to be smiling and enjoying my couch, so I assumed they approved. In the 4 years, I only seen them once, and upon asking the owner, he said that this used to be a plantation of about 100 acres, and in 1922, this house that presently sits upon the property was built over the old foundation, and in the basement you can tell there was an older structure there at one time. That basement, now, it's the perfect scary movie basement, directly from a horror movie. As a matter of fact, it scared me, so I didn't go to the basement that often. Now, later on, I have had several experiences that I take great joy in. At night, I began to hear a radio playing very old tunes. If I tried to find the source, it faded away as you would get closer to it. In the back of the house, there were 3 rooms, and they were turned into one room, with a door at each end. And at 2 or 3 in the morning, the door closest to our bedroom would slam shut, or you'd hear the doorknob turning and it would open. So during the cold weather, I blocked it so heat wouldn't go into the back unused room. And my partner and I would be sitting on our new couch, and the doorknob would start turning behind our backs rather loudly. And when that would happen, I would say, "I'm sorry, we have to keep the door closed to keep the heat in here." And it would just stop. I heard the radio quite a lot, and every so often I would see the spirit of a very tall male figure go through our front room, looking around the TV and things we had on the tables, pretty much just checking everything out. He was a shadow person, so old that there wasn't enough energy to project what he had looked like. He was just a shadow of his former self. Sometimes I see a black mist come to our door or come to my bedside, but it left and it didn't bother us, and the cats aren't bothered by it, so it's pretty harmless. Now on August 7th, 2017, we had the famous eclipse, and everyone had been getting ready for weeks to see this eclipse. My partner and I went outside and used a welder's helmet to safely look at the eclipse from our front yard. I had a lot of work that day, so I was up until about 3 a.m., and I was staggering through the house, turning off all the lights and locking the doors, etc., and I was staggering around in the dark. As I got to the bedroom door, I realized something was different. As I looked around me, I see this gray mist with tendrils swirling around me. I was in the center of this gray mist, and I was like, what the hell is this? And then I realized I was standing in the center of our ghost energy. Normally, I should have been freaked out, and I was so exhausted I just couldn't be bothered to be scared. I went, "Excuse me," and headed straight for bed. I'm sure the ghost was a little exasperated, but I didn't see him or hear him for several weeks, so maybe he was just keeping his distance. Not long after that, I got one of my best reactions for living there. One of our neighbors down the road was asking me where I lived, and I explained to them. Well, in the perfect tone, they said, "Y'all, you live in that haunted house?" Well, duh. Well, in 2018, the owner needed to sell the house, and we moved to Milton, Florida. I love it here, but I really enjoyed my time in our little haunted country cottage, and I'm sure the new owners will just adore their house full of ghosts. Never check on residents alone at night. Written by user Coda5111. To preface this is 100% real, and something that happened back when I worked healthcare in a long-term care home. The building I worked at housed both palliative and dementia patients. We had 3 units, referred to as the North Wing, the South Wing, and dementia. North and South made up an L shape, with the dining room right in the middle connecting them. The palliative was through doors usually kept locked at the end of North, attaching it like the top of a T. I worked night shift. We were a skeleton crew, a single nurse, and 2 healthcare aides, or HCAs. Yours truly included in the latter. If someone needed us at night, we were there. Usually because nights went by quite slowly, we did the day shift and evening shifts, extra charting in the dining room. From there, we could hear anyone that called out and respond to any alarms that went off. The nurse, Barb, the name changed for legal reasons, and I were sitting at the table. We were tapping away on our iPads and chatting. My fellow HCA had gone into South to put a man who usually forgot the time back into bed. Suddenly, I heard a faint call from somewhere in the north. Maybe the palliative. Barb had heard it too. We always carried our phones on us during night shift, so we didn't have to ring alarms and wake up residents. I told Barb I'd check it out and text her if I needed her, but to continue doing the charting. Besides, it was something that happened every single night. I walked down north, poking my head into each room as I went to see if anyone was awake, and try to find the source of the calling. All along the way I was met with sleeping bodies. As I hit palliative, I felt like a stone had settled in the back of my throat. I debated texting Barb, but knew that she'd end up teasing me about being scared of the dark. So I marched on, typing in the passcode and going through the heavy doors. As soon as they clicked shut behind me, I heard another cry to my left. It was a woman's voice saying, "Help me." I quickly went through each of the rooms, until I was standing at the end of the hallway in the dementia dining room, confused. No one was awake. All my babusias and kokums and grandmas asleep on that end. Again, louder, I heard the cry. It sounded almost angry, a "help me," from the opposite end of the unit. I ran across, checking in all the rooms. Again, as I entered the final room, not a single resident was awake. Not even the men who I doubted would be able to sound like the voice I'd heard. I left the final room. I was about to check them all again. Closer, perhaps one was having a nightmare. As I stepped foot out of the room, I froze, a chill running up my spine. Outside of the last room, there is a small living area, with a couch, a table, and some chairs. Due to the unit being for dementia residents, all the furniture was weighed down underneath with massive concrete blocks to prevent the residents from moving them and hurting themselves. It took over 4 men to move the couch on cleaning days. Every chair, over 50 pounds each, and said 200-pound couch had turned and was facing the room I came from. All turned and facing me. There's no possible way 4 people, let alone Barb and my fellow HCA, could have moved that couch, not only in the short amount of time I was in that room, but also without making a single noise. The floors bear scratch marks from the numerous times we've been forced to move it around before. I ran to the doors, ignored the multiple cries of "help me, help me, help me" that followed, biting my heels. It took me 3 attempts to get the password right. I ran down north to where Barb had started to come to look for me. Her and my fellow co-worker went to check on the units after I told them what had happened, and returned with pale faces. They knew I couldn't have moved the couch. From that night on, we never checked on calls alone. I still don't know what happened. Many people have died in that home. I hope they all eventually found peace. And a babusa is grandmother in Ukraine, and kukum is grandmother in a specific native language. Apologize for not remembering which. I had 2 female dementia patients who requested they be called it. I should have put in the effort to know what their language was called. Again, the story is not fiction. This happened to me and wasn't the only scary thing that happened on night shift. Working in a place where people go to die, I now have a healthy respect for those who may not have moved on peacefully. I'm not sure that this qualifies as a ghost story. Written by Darren from Korea. This is something that happened to me about 5 years ago. At the time, I was staying in an office space converted into apartments. This place was quite spacious, with windows that filled 2/3 of the wall. Across the street was a small studio apartment building with its windows facing my room, so I installed window blinds on every window as soon as I moved in and kept the blinds down at all times. I got the room cheap because the landlord was a shaman. In Korea, people considered shamans to be unclean, whatever that word means, and avoid living near them. Therefore, wherever shamans live, rent in the neighborhood drops considerably. And that is good news to people like me who are not that superstitious. Personally, I found my landlord to be quite personable. He was about my father's age, soft-spoken, considerate, and well-mannered. Sure, sometimes I could faintly hear him chanting in the middle of the night when his patron spirit possessed him, or at least that's what he sheepishly confessed when I probed him about it. But frankly, I didn't mind at all. The rent was unbelievably cheap, and hey, everyone's a little weird, right? Anyway, one night I woke up from sleep. Well, maybe woke up isn't the right words. I was in a dreamless coma, and then next I was staring at a pair of small, very white feet peeking out of an ankle-length black skirt hemmed with decorative white lace. The transition from unconsciousness to wakefulness was so abrupt that it took me a moment to process what my eyes were seeing. After staring dumbly at those feet for a while, my brain processed several thoughts. I'm living alone, so why am I seeing feet other than mine? Mine are large and hairy. Feet don't usually hang in the air, so why are they? I started to feel panic slowly rising from the depths of my soul. I wanted to find out whom those feet were attached, so I slowly lifted my eyes. Then I saw the girl. She was facing away from me towards the window, which was wide open and letting the moonlight that was flooding into the room. Never have I seen in my life such a bright moon. The illumination was so beautiful that it looked almost supernatural, and the girl was hovering in the air, head lifted towards the moon. She was basking in the streaming light and gently swaying in the breeze I could not feel. Her head was a bit too small to be human, and she wore her hair down with a braid. She was of a slight build and was wearing some kind of black dress with white lace at the hem. And as I noticed before, she was barefoot. While I was taking in all these little details, my brain was desperately trying to convince myself that what I was seeing wasn't real, but I failed. I tried to sit up and found out that I couldn't move my limbs at all. This terrified me. I screamed, but all that came out was a muffled whimper because my tongue and lips were paralyzed too. However, that was enough to get my hovering girl's attention. When the sound somehow escaped from my closed mouth, she startled, and then in one smooth move, she spun in the air to face me. She had a very small, delicate nose and lips that were almost too small to be human. In her eyes, I simply could not see them. The upper part of her face was shrouded by such a deep shadow that I could not make anything out of it. Despite that, I could somehow read her expression. She seemed somewhat alarmed and confused. She glided across the room to investigate the bed I was laying on, and then lowered her head as if she wanted to examine my face. The black abyss that was the upper part of her face was inches away from mine. The terror was just too much for me. With all the strength I could muster, I kicked. It broke the paralysis and my foot flew up, but she practically blinked away from my kick with a horrified expression, and then my eyes fluttered open and she vanished. Okay, let me explain. I thought I was awake when I first saw the ghost girl's feet, but it turned out that this whole time my eyes were actually closed. However, the room looked exactly the same before I opened my eyes. The window was completely open, the blind was rolled up, and the supernatural moonlight was still streaming down into my room. The thing is, I never, ever opened the window, let alone roll up the blind because of the building across the street. To this date, I still think about what happened that night from time to time. It could very well have been a vivid dream, but then that doesn't really explain the open window and the rolled up blind. Sure, it's entirely possible that I somehow sleepwalked to the window, opened them without my brain remembering it, but to me, that's even more disturbing than believing in the hovering girl's existence. A council worker let slip my house was being scoped for a burglary. Written by user Sturts Kampflugzug1. When I was a younger boy, in my early teenage years, my mom had a family of white Siberian tigers which stood in the living room facing out the window onto the street. They ranged from small plush ones to a large, real-life, like adult white Siberian tiger. Usually they received comments when people passed by because she had arranged them to stand together like a family. It was winter time, and some houses on my street had already been targeted by people with various belongings being stolen, ranging from a couch to a money jar to a personalized angel in someone's house which was made for their daughter who had been stillborn. There was a council worker working on the hill corner fixing a pavement. Sometimes if you passed by, they would talk to you for short periods, just to be friendly since we were young. I was out one night with a friend, and we were talking with them about houses being targeted around the area when one of the workers turned it into a joke and said through laughter, "If it were me, I would go for that house on," and he named my street. "They're obviously loaded, man." Knowing we lived on that street, we curiously inquired which house he was talking about. Then he said quite bluntly and in a matter-of-fact tone, "The one with the tigers in the window. Could take that one easy. It always looks so empty." I was obviously young and naive, and I didn't fully understand, so I quite proudly said, "That's my house." He stopped what he was doing and just stared at us for what could have been a few short minutes, then said, "There you go. You just never know who you're talking to. It's a small world." Then he just started laughing. I forgot all about that until someone tried to break into our house a few weeks before Christmas. We didn't know anyone personally who would be involved, but when they were caught weeks after trying to get into another house, people said it was the council workers who had done it. They apparently weren't really workers, but using it as an excuse because nobody can remember seeing a van, and they all wore plain clothes with high visibility vests without a logo on the back. The Sleepover From Hell, written by user dankkyyy, DANKKYYY. Back in middle school, I had a friend. Let's call her Anne. Anne lived in a nice house, way nicer than my small apartment, so we spent the night there. There were many stories about Anne's house our other friends had told me, but I didn't pay too much mind. Truthfully, I thought they were just trying to scare me. A few Monster Energy drinks later, it was just Anne and I sitting in her room. It's about 3 a.m., but that was normal for us in middle school. We were talking when we heard something from the kitchen. At first, it was just small noises. A clink here, a clatter there. Anne and I looked at each other confused. Her mom was asleep in her room down the hall. The dog was in there too, and her dad worked the graveyard shift, so he wasn't even home. We then heard a deep, bellowing laugh. It was loud. It sounded like Andre the Giant just laughed in her kitchen. Anne and I are both now terrified. Then all the pots in the house started clanging together. Anne and I booked it to her mom's room and tried to tell her what was happening. She says we're just tired and tells us to go to bed. We decided it was best to sleep in her mom's bed with her. The moment we decided, the dog starts to go ballistic. She's scratching at the door and barking like crazy. Her mom takes the dog outside through the sliding glass door in her room. The dog is still barking, but just through the glass. Next thing I know, I'm lying in bed praying to God. I say the Our Father more times than I can remember, and I'm not even that religious. It was just the only thing I could think of. Then we felt someone or something touch our legs. We both froze with fear. We had our heads under the comforters and were crying. Once we felt it, we both decided to look up. We could see the imprints on the comforter as it moved up. It was so slow, yet happened so fast. I can still feel it on my legs to this day. We both managed to pass out, probably from pure fear. When we woke up the next morning, I texted my mom to come get me immediately. As we waited for my mom to pick me up, we ate some breakfast. I was drinking water out of this particular glass. It was a glass, but it had a metal handle that wrapped around the glass. You can take the glass out from the metal frame by pulling the glass up and out. But the shape of the glass didn't allow it to fall out the bottom of the metal frame, obviously. All of us were standing in the kitchen, including her dad, and you just see the glass I'm holding just pop out from the top and smash on the floor. Someone would have had to push it from the bottom. We all stared at the cup for a good 30 seconds before we realized we should probably clean up the glass. After the glass broke, her mom blessed the house. I never slept over again, and Anne liked to pretend like it never happened. I hope you all enjoyed all of our haunted tales this evening. If you would like to discuss any of the stories on tonight's podcast, I'm always live during and after the podcast every Sunday night starting at 7 p.m. Join our community on our Facebook group page and YouTube channel. If you have a haunting story of your own or artwork and you want to submit it for consideration for the future show, drop me a line on our Reddit page or email address. All our links are below in the description. Special thanks to Darken Mood for all his wonderful art that you can check out on his Reddit page. I want to thank all our brave storytellers, for without them there would be no show. A detailed list of story credits are in the description. But most importantly, I want to thank you, the listener, for taking time out of your day to listen to Haunted Tales from the Old Rocking Chair. I hope you have a wonderful night, and as always, sweet dreams. Power off. Alright guys, that's the show. I hope you enjoyed. Just bear with me because there is a learning curve with this new PC. The audio was really low for the background music, and I do apologize, but hopefully the next one will be better. Other than that, I just want to wish everyone a happy Valentine's Day, and as always, sweet dreams.